Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, it's been 3 weeks since we had the last class. And just to give a very brief review, last class I introduced the topic that we call it the second division, what I call the second division in the Buddha's teaching. The first division deals with what I call teachings that lead to welfare and happiness in this very life itself. These are basic ethical teachings, teachings on family responsibilities, obligations, right livelihood, and right relations between people. The second major area that we've just come to is called, or I call it, the happiness pertaining to future lives. And this level of teaching deals with the modes of conduct, modes of practice that are intended to generate wholesome karma and to bring about a happy, fortunate rebirth in one's next existence. Then the third level of teaching, which we didn't come to at all, is the teaching which deals with the attainment of ultimate happiness or the ultimate good. And though I make a distinction between these 3 levels of teaching, we shouldn't see these distinctions as being too rigid and absolute, because there are interrelationships between all of them, so that each one, we could say, forms the foundation for the other. And certain practices that are included within one category also can be brought into the other categories. Okay, what underlies this teaching of the happiness pertaining to future lives? We call it the underlying framework is the Buddha's teaching on karma and rebirth. The Buddha teaches that this is not the only life that we live, but that each life is just one link in a chain of existences which goes back into beginningless time and which can continue indefinitely into the future. The Buddha's teaching on rebirth is not a doctrine of reincarnation. The Buddha doesn't teach the existence of a permanent self or soul that remains the same and that migrates from one life to the next, taking on one body, casting it off, taking on another body, but retaining its essential identity. That is the doctrine of reincarnation, and the Buddha's doctrine of rebirth is not quite the same as this. The Buddha teaches that personal existence is a process which is always changing. But this process has 2 aspects, 2 components, the bodily or physical aspect and the mental aspect, the stream of consciousness. And the stream of consciousness in human existence necessarily operates on the basis of a physical body. So as long as the physical body can support the process of consciousness, then one continues on in a single lifetime. So when the physical body loses its vitality, or when the life faculty is cut off, either naturally or unnaturally, then the physical body can no longer support the mental process. But as long as there is ignorance and craving remaining within the mental process will move on to a new physical basis. And that is what is called rebirth. Okay, last time I spoke about different aspects of rebirth and karma in a general way. And now I want to take some of the texts that have been included in this anthology and then go through them carefully, one by one. And so the first text that I want to take is on page 155, in which the Buddha is going to speak about different types of karma. Now, karma is the factor that determines the form of rebirth that one takes. And as I explained last time, karma ultimately reduces to volition, to volitional action. So it is not just any kind of happening in which one is involved, but karma consists in one's own willed actions, one's morally significant, intentional actions. And all of these actions generate some kind of, what we could say, all of these actions deposit some kind of seed within the stream of consciousness. The seed is a potentiality to produce results that correspond to the nature of the original action. Okay, so in this sutta, the Buddha is going to explain 4 kinds of karma, which he has declared, and this is an important phrase, after I had realized them for myself by direct knowledge. And so it's not quite the case that the Buddha is teaching the doctrine of karma simply because this happened to be part of the cultural worldview of India during this period. But the Buddha says that he himself has realized, seen the nature of karma and how karma functions. And now he teaches 4 kinds of karma based on this direct experience, this personal understanding. Okay, so first he gives a kind of outline of what they are. There is dark karma with dark results, bright karma with bright results. Then there is karma that is dark and bright with dark and bright results. And then there is karma that is neither dark nor bright with neither dark nor bright results. And this is the karma that leads to the destruction of karma, to the ending of karma. Okay, and so now the Buddha goes on to explain each of these general classes of karma. He says, first, what is dark karma with dark results? And then he goes on to explain or to answer. Here, someone generates an afflictive volitional formation of body, speech, or mind. Having done so, he is reborn in an afflictive world. And when he is reborn in an afflictive world, afflictive contacts touch him. Being touched by afflictive contacts, he experiences an afflictive feeling, extremely painful, as for example, the beings in hell experience. Okay, this is called dark karma with dark results. Okay, let's go back over this and take each of these phrases and try to understand them. Okay, any translation into English has to be somewhat makeshift. Of course, it's difficult to do precise justice in the English language to manners of expression used in the ancient Indian languages of the text. And so we have a phrase here that's translated, here someone generates an afflictive volitional formation of body, speech, or mind. Now the Pali here is somewhat interesting. Okay, for somebody who generates an afflictive, what's translated as generates an afflictive bodily formation. Or here, generates an afflictive volitional formation of body. Okay, the Pali reads Sadhya Pacham, that means afflictive, with affliction. Then the formation of body is kaya sankaram, and the verb is abhisankaroti. Now we could see that here we have the verb uses the article, Api Sankaroti. And this sankara extends also to what is created by the action, called sankhara. The prefix Api just gives a little more force to the verb. And now the word, or the verb, sankaroti or abhisankaroti. Okay, the verb that's at the base of abhisankaroti is the verb karoti, which means to do or to act. It's from the root kar. And from this verb karoti, we also get the word kama. We can see this better in the Sanskrit form, which is karma. But what happens in Pali, because it was based on spoken languages, for ease of pronunciation, the R is assimilated to the M, so we get kama. So the statement shows that our actions are coming or originating from volition. Since abhisankaroti means, it's translated to generate, but in its full meaning it means to create some volition, to create volitionally, to act volitionally. And when one acts volitionally, that volition of mind is called a sankhara. So sankhara is what I translate as volitional formation. And so one type of volitional formations are called afflictive volitional formations. And these will be generally volitional formations that involve in some way inflicting pain and suffering upon others, or it could be on oneself. Okay, now a person in the course of their life will generate many different types of volitional formations, good and bad. But if there's a predominance of the bad karmic volitions, the afflictive karmic volitions, what's called here the dark karma, then one will be reborn in an afflictive world. This is a world in which one is subject to many types of painful experiences, intense, even extreme painful experiences. Okay, so I just want to sort of schematize this. Okay, so when one is born in an afflictive world, this will be, it could be, the Buddha gives us an example here, the beings in hell. Now what's quite significant is that the world into which one is born is in a sense a reflection of one's own karma, one's own volitional formations, volitional creations. So we tend to think of the world as being something that exists objectively out there in which we happen to live. And we might conceive of other realms also in that way. But actually the realm in which we are living is a reflection or manifestation of our own karma. In a sense, it's our own karma builds up or creates that world. It doesn't mean that the world is entirely subjective, just a projection of the mind. No, that's not the Buddha's teaching. But the world in which we are reborn is a world which is, say, a product of the many karmas of the beings that inhabit that world. And the reason why a being takes rebirth into a particular world is because that being has created the karma that is attuned to that world, the karma that finds the field for its manifestation within that world. So we could say that all the different realms of sentient life are built up, in a sense, or constructed by the volitional activity of living beings. And if through our actions, if we change the nature of our karma, then at death, or when we take rebirth, another world will manifest to us, which will be the world that corresponds most precisely to that karma. And the verb here, abhisankaroti, it's based on the stem karoti, to create, but this prefix sang has the sense of together. So the verb abhisankaroti is almost like the English word construct. The English word construct has the prefix con, which means together. And then struct is what? Structure. Something like to stand together. But the verb abhisankaroti means to make together, to create, to construct, to form. Okay, and once one takes rebirth into that world, here an afflicted world, how does that afflicted world react upon oneself? In order for actual affliction to be experienced, first there has to be contact. Contact is the coming together of the object with the mind, with consciousness, through a sense faculty. So when one is reborn in an afflicted world, in that world one will be subject to painful contacts through any of the 5 or 6 sense faculties, 6 including the mind faculty. And then, once that afflictive contact takes place, that contact gives rise to a feeling. Feeling is the experience. In Buddhism, the word feeling or vedana is not used in the sense of emotion, the way we use the two words interchangeably in English. But rather, feeling signifies what we call the affective tone of experience. A-F-F-E-C-T-I-V-E. That is, the quality of experience as being either pleasant, painful, or neither pleasant nor painful. So when there are afflictive feelings, those would be painful feelings. And so we have the sequence now from the volitional formations that one creates to the world that one's reborn into, the world that arises as a kind of natural response to one's volitional actions. And then from that particular world, one experiences a particular type of contact, and that contact gives rise to the corresponding type of feeling. Now, those of you who already have studied Buddhism to some extent will know the teaching of the 12 links of dependent origination, Paticca-Samuppada. And if one looks carefully at the terms that I put on the board here, one will see first in Kaya Sankhara and Abhisankaroti, this turns into the factor of dependent origination, Samkhara, the second factor, volitional formations. Then later in dependent origination we have 2 links, contact and feeling arising through contact. But in the normal formula of dependent origination, we go from the sankharas, the formations, to consciousness, and then from consciousness to name and form, nama rupa, and then from name and form to the 6 sense spaces, and then from the 6 sense spaces to contact. But now if we look at this formula here, or the series here, we have an afflicted world in place of consciousness and name and form. But when one asks, what in fact is our world? What does it really consist of? Our world consists of this interplay of consciousness with name and form, with the mental side of experience and the physical side of experience. And so we could easily substitute here for world. Thanks for reminding me. Okay, so here we can actually go from the sankharas, those are the volitional formations, to the particular consciousness, which is we call this the base consciousness that underlies our whole existence, the fundamental type of consciousness. That fundamental type of consciousness arises through our volitional activity in earlier life. And then this basic consciousness, from the basic consciousness there arises the active types of consciousness that engage with the world. And along with this active consciousness is name and form, or mentality, the other mental factors, and materiality, the physical component of experience. And then for contact to take place, contact with objects, there is needed the 6 sense bases. So through our volitions, we create this bodily organism that we possess. And this bodily organism has the 5 physical senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the inner sense, the mind organ. And then through these 6 senses, there comes contact, and through contact, feeling. Okay, we'll continue now with the sutta. So this is the dark karma with dark results. Later we'll come to more specific cases of dark karma and so on. Okay, now the Buddha takes the second type is bright karma with bright results. Okay, and here someone generates a non-afflictive volitional formation of body, speech, or mind. This would be what we call a wholesome, a strong, wholesome type of karma. And having done so, he is reborn in a non-afflictive world. This would be a very pleasant world in which there's very little physical pain and suffering. Okay, when one is reborn in a non-afflictive world, non-afflictive contacts touch him. One is exposed to pleasant objects, and so the contact with those objects will be pleasant. And being touched by non-afflictive contacts, he experiences a non-afflictive feeling. That is, he experiences very pleasant feelings, extremely pleasant feelings. And then the Buddha gives us an example, the devas or gods of refulgent glory. This is a class of gods dwelling on a very, very high heavenly plane in which they're experiencing, for the most part, constant, blissful, enjoyable feelings. Okay, that is bright karma with bright results. Then, in the third place, the Buddha explains what's called dark and bright karma with dark and bright results. Now, strictly speaking, there's no karma, no action, which is both dark and bright, both unwholesome and wholesome simultaneously at the same time. So when the Buddha here is speaking about dark and bright karma, what is actually meant is that somebody creates, on some occasions, wholesome karma, on other occasions, unwholesome karma. And so there is a more or less equal mixture of dark and bright karma. And so the Buddha explains, someone generates both an afflictive volitional formation of body, speech, or mind, and a non-afflictive volitional formation. Sometimes he performs wholesome deeds, sometimes unwholesome deeds. Okay, so having done so, he is reborn in a world that is both afflictive and non-afflictive. This is a world in which there's a combination of painful experience and pleasant experience. One is subject to both. Then when one is reborn in such a world, both types of contact affect one. One is exposed to both types of contact, pleasant contact, unpleasant contact. And then being touched by such contacts, he experiences both an afflictive feeling and a non-afflictive feeling. One experiences both pleasant feelings and painful feelings. Then the Buddha gives as examples, human beings, some devas, some gods who live in worlds in which there's both pleasant and painful feelings, and some beings in the lower world. For example, perhaps animals we could take, at least domestic animals that are safe and secure, well looked after, and so often they experience pleasant feelings, but also because of the nature of animal existence, they'll be subject to many painful feelings. Actually, come to think of it, domestic animals can experience at the physical level more pleasure than many human beings. It's true. I mean, it's not the laughing matter. It's very true. A pet of some rich person living on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan will get sumptuous food every day, a comfortable bed. If it's sick, its owners will take it to veterinarian for treatment. But there are human beings who go day after day, year after year, with barely enough food to sustain their bodies, subject to harsh weather conditions, terrible, devastating illnesses. Okay, so this is the third type of karma. Here the same principles apply, it's just a different type of karma in each case. But the fourth is somewhat different. This is called karma that is neither dark nor bright, with neither dark nor bright results, which leads to the destruction or elimination of karma. And here it's explained rather abstractly as the volition to abandon the dark karma with dark results, the bright karma with bright results, and the mixed karma, dark and bright karma with dark and bright results. This is called the karma that is neither dark nor bright, with neither dark nor bright results, which leads to the destruction of karma. But other sutras explain that this is the volition present when one is developing the Noble Eightfold Path, or when one is developing the 7 factors of enlightenment. And when it's said to be neither dark nor bright, one shouldn't think that it's just somewhere halfway between dark and bright. But this is the kind of action which is bright, even brighter than the normal bright karma. Since this is the karma that leads not to a happy rebirth, but to liberation. Okay, and that type of karma does not lead to, of itself, its nature is not to lead to rebirth into a particular realm, but rather to dismantle or deconstruct the entire cycle of existence. Okay, maybe now I'll ask whether there are any questions based on this sutta. So please try to keep the questions based on the text itself or my explanation. Yes, please.
I just have sort of a basic question, because I noticed the order in which you discuss these things are body, speech, and mind. Is there a reason for that order?
It might be in increasing levels of subtlety, like the bodily karma is one that's most evident, most obvious. Verbal karma, sometimes one doesn't see, for example, the harm that unwholesome speech might cause, or the benefits that wholesome speech might bring. But still, speech is something which is manifest outwardly. But mental karma, this is action which just remains entirely within, so that generally it's very difficult to see that unless one could read another person's mind. And also when it comes to matters of order, a general way in which the Buddha explains his teachings in one sutta after another, is to begin with the negative side, the unwholesome side, the dark side, and then progress from that to the wholesome side. Excuse me? Yes, children, but responsible for the volitional action. Yeah. Is there any special reason for that? It might be because the karma that leads to the ending of karma, the karma that's neither dark nor bright, is also a wholesome karma. And so if the Buddha used the terms unwholesome or wholesome, then he wouldn't be able to develop that fourfold pattern. So the fourfold pattern gets its, at least the fourth term gets its meaning from avoiding the use of the word wholesome. Yes.
In many traditions, they say that pain and affliction is necessary in order for one to wake up.
Right.
So, if one is in a bright world, wouldn't that make one complete?
That is definitely the case. And this is in a way an implicit danger in, not in performing wholesome actions, but in getting reborn into a higher realm of existence without having well-developed right understanding. If one has well-developed right understanding, then one can be reborn in higher planes of existence, but one will preserve in some form an understanding of the unsatisfactory nature of all conditioned realms of existence. And so though one will be reborn, one might be reborn under favorable conditions, one will not be carried away by the favorable conditions and become complacent. But for those who don't have that right understanding, this is the way the process of samsara gets dragged on and on and on. One performs good, meritorious actions, takes rebirth in a pleasant realm, and then, since one lacks that right understanding, one becomes carried away by, or swept away by the pleasures and enjoyments that are coming to one through the fruition of one's past karma. And then one becomes negligent and can even then indulge in unwholesome actions. And then so that when they bring the results, they can bring one down to a lower realm.
So, in the stream of consciousness from one life to another, would one have that understanding embedded in oneself?
One can't be sure of it, but to the extent that one has developed right understanding in this life, that will be, I would call this a strong inherited tendency. So one will tend to have that right understanding in the next life. So there's no absolute guarantee of that. But the stronger and clearer one develops one's understanding, the more likely it is that one will preserve that understanding from life to life. Yes, please.
future result that you utilize the common support type. And
Yeah.
the first one is predominantly hold on comma, and you collectively determine what is going to be going to.
Collectively.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure I understand.
Because part of it understands that a B word you exclusively write comma.
I see. Oh, I see. Okay, I understand the point. I think this has to be understood by what is the predominant type of karma within the lifetime. So this would be a being who consistently, repeatedly engages in unwholesome actions, afflictive actions. And so if that is the case, then when rebirth takes place, what is said is that one particular karma that one has performed in the course of one's life will come up into the mind and then take on the role of generating the next existence, the rebirth. So if one regularly and consistently engages in unwholesome actions, afflictive actions, then it's more likely that at the time of death, an unwholesome karma will come to the surface of consciousness and then take on the role of generating the rebirth. Whereas if a person consistently, regularly engages in wholesome actions, then it's more likely that at the time of death, a wholesome karma will come to the surface and take on the role of generating the rebirth. But according to, I think this is according to the commentaries, at the time of death, there's only one action, one karma that one has performed that takes on the role of generating the rebirth. But in the case of most people, the karma that takes on that role will be a type of action that one has habitually performed. Occasionally it can happen that one has performed a very strong action, which is the opposite of one's normal, consistent actions. In that case, it might happen that that unusual, strong karma will come to the surface and take on the role of generating rebirth. So if a person has consistently and regularly performed unwholesome actions, but on one occasion he's performed some extraordinary act of generosity, self-sacrifice, it could just happen that that action takes on the role of generating the rebirth and will bring rebirth into a pleasant realm of existence. But it doesn't mean that this person will escape the consequences of their unwholesome actions. Because those unwholesome actions will remain, and when the occasion opens up, then they will bring their own results. Does that answer the question? Okay, let us.
Is someone other than the individual monitoring this, or who's registering the karma?
Who is doing?
Is someone other than the individual?
Yeah.
Is someone keeping track of this karma?
Is there some scorekeeper behind the scenes with a scorecard?
Especially if someone has had an illness or a brain damage to the sleep.
Or a what?
Someone who's not aware, consciously aware of what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're not aware of the sequence of events, the karma or reactions thereof.
Yeah.
And then they're dead. And then what happens? Who really decides where the person's born or...
Who determines whether?
Yes, they're determining consciousness.
Yeah. This is said to be inherent to the karmas themselves, that the karmas themselves have this tendency to produce their result. This is part of the natural law, the natural order of things. Just as if one plants apple seeds, one doesn't need some divine being. If in this field one plants apple seeds, in that field one plants grape seeds, one doesn't need some divine supervisor to say, These seeds will grow into apple trees. These seeds will grow into grapevines. But it's intrinsic to the nature of the seed itself to produce a particular type of plant. And so it's intrinsic to the actions themselves to produce the results that correspond to those actions. And the actions themselves have their own tendency to lead to different realms of rebirth. But if somebody is, say, the example you mentioned, if somebody is sick or they don't know what they're doing, if a person doesn't know what they're doing, then it would seem that this is not a fully volitional action. And so one could say that that would not be a karma that can produce rebirth. So if one takes somebody who is, say, would be classified as insane, a madman who goes into a crowd, sadly this happened just last week in the United States, goes into a crowd and starts shooting, killing people, even though we would judge that person to be insane, but they know what they're doing. They know that they're doing something that should not be done, killing. And so they're getting the karma of killing. Yes?
Because we keep using the word action,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes our actions are encultured on us, like, we know what is going to look good to everybody, so I will behave, really good. But I continue perhaps to harbor some resentment and hate in my heart, but I don't act on it.
Yeah. Okay, if one harbors the hatred within one's heart, then one is creating unwholesome mental karma. But this is in the terms of this text, this would be generating an afflictive volitional formation of mind.
It is an act.
Yeah, it is an action. Yeah, we call this a mental action, manokamma, an action of mind. But if one has mental karmas, say, prompting one to perform a certain action, like if one hates somebody, one might be prompted to harm that person physically or to speak rudely to that person. But if one restrains that impulse and just keeps it purely mental, then the mental karma will be weaker than a bodily karma or a verbal karma expressing that intention. And then if one is making the effort to overcome that hatred, one recognizes that it's something harmful and destructive even to oneself, even though it might arise, but if one makes the effort to control it, then one is on the way to gaining mastery over it. Okay, maybe one more question, and we'll go on. How long does it take a dog or a cat to become a human? Okay, animals are also generating karma because animals have the ability to, they act volitionally, they act through intention with volition. And now, in animals' volition will be to a much, much greater extent than a human being's volition, will be governed by the instinctual patterns which are built into that particular species. And so an animal, because it's acting through the instinctual pattern of its species, it will be creating, it could be creating unwholesome karma, but that unwholesome karma, in my understanding, would be weaker than the unwholesome karma that a human being would generate who engages in an unwholesome action. Because a human being understands what is good, what is bad, and has the capacity to restrain themselves. But an animal doesn't. And so for this reason, the being who's reborn in the animal realm will have a more difficult time emerging from the animal realm back to a higher type of rebirth, because their behavior is generally consistently determined by the instinctual patterns which bind them into unwholesome types of action motivated by greed and by destructiveness, by violence. But it does happen that beings in the animal realm sometimes they can perform acts that we would consider to be wholesome, acts of self-sacrifice for the sake of their children, say, or even for the sake of their owners, if it's a pet animal. And so through that action, the animal can generate a karma that will bring it out of the animal realm, back into the human realm. Also, it's the case that in the course of this beginningless samsara, every being has created masses and masses of karma. And now what could happen through some favorable circumstance in an animal is that a good karma that is performed not in its life as an animal, but in some earlier life, becomes prominent at the time of death and governs the rebirth process. And when that happens, then the animal can emerge from the animal realm back into the human realm. Okay, I want to go on to the next sutta. Okay, the next sutta gives us a basic scheme of the unwholesome and wholesome types of karma that the Buddha has regularly taught. And in the abstract, apart from the way they're presented in the sutta, these are called the 10 courses or paths of unwholesome karma and the 10 paths of wholesome karma. I hope my handwriting is readable. Okay, so these are called, on the one hand, the 10 akusala karma patta. You can see that there's an etymological connection between the Pali word patta and the English word path. So these are called the 10 paths or 10 courses of unwholesome karma, unwholesome action. And of these we have 3 of, well, how do you read that? Body, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. 4 of speech, divisive speech, false speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. And 3 are purely mental. 1 is called covetousness. 9 is ill will. And the 10th is wrong view. We're going to see how these are explained in the sutta itself. Then there are opposites. Again, they're arranged into groups of 3, 4, and 3. Refraining from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Then pertaining to speech, refraining from false speech, refraining from divisive speech, refraining from harsh speech, refraining from idle chatter. And then 3 pertain to mind, non-covetousness, non-greed, you could say. 9, goodwill, and 10th is right view. Okay, now the sutta, which begins on page 156, will give formal definitions or explanations of these types of karma. Okay, the Buddha spoke this sutta to a group of Brahmin villages living in the country of Kosala. When the Buddha with his group of monks were passing through this town or village, the people heard about him, and then they came to him with the question, which comes in paragraph 4. They asked him, what is the cause and condition why some beings here on the breakup of the body after death are reborn in a state of misery, in a bad destination, in the lower world, or in hell? In what's called the state of misery comprises 3 unhappy destinations. That is the hell realm, the animal realm, and then the realm of afflicted spirits, sometimes called hungry ghosts. These are beings with very strong desires that they can never satisfy. And then they ask, what is the cause and condition why some beings here on the breakup of the body after death are reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world? Okay, the good destinations will include rebirth as a human being under fortunate conditions, favorable conditions, and in one of the heavenly worlds. The end of the sutta will give us a kind of cosmological map of the various heavenly worlds. Okay, so this is the question, and then the Buddha explains that it is by reason of unrighteous conduct. The Pali word means literally visama, uneven, rough, coarse conduct, conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma, that some beings here on the breakup of the body after death are reborn in a state of misery, of bad destination, the lower world and hell. And then he explains the reason for the good rebirth. It is by reason of righteous conduct. This is samacharya, smooth, even actions. By reason of righteous conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, that some beings here on the breakup of the body after death are reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world. Okay, so the Brahmin villages found this somewhat too concise for their understanding. And so they asked the Buddha to elaborate, and then the Buddha explains that there are three types of unrighteous bodily conduct, four types of unrighteous, unwholesome verbal conduct, and three kinds of unrighteous or unwholesome mental conduct. And now he goes to elaborate. Okay, the three types of unrighteous bodily conduct. One is that somebody kills living beings. He's murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence without any mercy for living beings. So that is killing. Stealing means that one takes, by way of theft, the wealth and property of others. And then somebody commits sexual misconduct. He has intercourse. I have to say that the Buddhist texts always explain things, or generally explain things, from the standpoint of the male. This is typical of the period. But to understand from the standpoint of the women, just invert the way it's expressed. So he has intercourse with women who are protected by their parents, protected by other relatives, who are still under the guardianship of parents or older relatives, those who have a husband, those who are protected by law. I think in India sometimes kings would make decrees that certain women are inviolable. And even with those already engaged. Okay, so these are three kinds of unrighteous bodily conduct. Okay, four kinds, and I should also add that even though, say, killing and stealing, they're called bodily karma because generally they're committed by the body. But they could also be committed by speech, even though they're still classified as bodily karma. For example, I don't kill anybody myself, but I'm a gang leader and I have henchmen, and I say, knock off such and such a person. So I just go about my business. We read in the newspaper that so-and-so has been assassinated, and they grab this henchman and they charge him with the crime. I get away with it, but in fact, because I've given the order, I also commit this unwholesome bodily karma of killing. Similarly with stealing, I might have a group of henchmen who are working for me. I instruct them, you guys, midnight you rob the bank. I do nothing except give the orders, but if the bank gets robbed, I also acquire the karma of stealing. So one can't escape from the karma consequences by thinking that one didn't perform the action. just gave the orders. Even if one gives the order by way of hinting, like people know that one is, this happens in politics with underdeveloped countries, also perhaps in developed countries. The head of state will say, so-and-so is getting a little too powerful. Don't you think so? Gives a little wink to his henchman, and that's enough of a signal for the henchman to know not that rival off before he gets too powerful. Okay, then the verbal types of verbal conduct. Here the Buddha takes what is the strongest type of false speech, that is bearing false witness against somebody. Okay, so when somebody is summoned to a court or to a meeting and so on, and he's questioned as a witness, thus, tell what you know. Not knowing, he says, I know, or knowing, he says, I do not know. That is, when it's his responsibility to reveal the truth about somebody who's committed, say, a crime, he conceals the crime of the other. Not seeing, he says, I see, or seeing, he says, I do not see. So then in full awareness, this is consciously and deliberately, he speaks falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, even to tell a falsehood to benefit somebody else, or for some trifling worldly end. Okay, so this is false speech. Then what's called here malicious speech means speech that is intended to divide people who are on friendly terms. So one reports to one person some complaints about another person with the intention of breaking up their friendship, breaking up their harmonious relationship, and setting them against each other. Okay, to speak harshly is to speak in a way that's rough, hard, hurtful to others, offensive to others, bordering on anger. And now this one needs a little explanation, because sometimes one has to criticize another person, and sometimes, often the criticism will not be taken very happily by the person that one criticizes. But the Buddha says that if you have to criticize somebody, you should do so, but do so under the right conditions, when it's the right time, setting up in your own mind the thought of benefiting that person, speaking to that person with a mind of loving kindness, and doing so in a gentle way, not in a way that's going to cause that person pain and misery. But if you fulfill all of those conditions and the person still feels upset, that is the problem with the other person. One can't always speak pleasantly and agreeably to others. Okay, then the fourth is idle chatter, which here I have to say is explained in a way which is more appropriate to monastic persons, to speak on anything contrary to the Dhamma or the discipline, to speak at the wrong time. But here, this is what's applicable to anybody, to speak words that are worthless, unreasonable, immoderate, and unbeneficial. Okay, then the three kinds of unrighteous mental conduct, or unwholesome mental conduct. Okay, now what's called covetousness is a little bit different from greed, from ordinary greed. One can have greed, and it's unwholesome, but it's not strong enough to become an unwholesome course of karma. The greed becomes an unwholesome course of karma when one covets the wealth and property of others with the thought, I want that person's belongings to become mine. In other words, it's the wish, the thought of acquiring the possessions of others, even if one doesn't act on that thought. Okay, then the mind of ill will, again, it's somewhat stronger than an ordinary thought of anger or hatred. But it's the thought of anger or hatred accompanied by the wish that a particular person or group of people will meet with suffering and misery. The wish, may these beings be slain and slaughtered, may they be cut off, perish, or be annihilated. But I think one doesn't have to go that far, but even if one wishes that others will meet with harm and with suffering, it will count as ill will. And then what's called wrong view is not simply a kind of misunderstanding of the Buddha's teaching. That's in itself not the wrong view. But it's rather the wrong view that constitutes a course of unwholesome karma is a view which denies the reality of ethical distinctions, but which denies that there is any result or fruition of good and bad deeds. So we have that somewhat elaborate formulation of that here. Okay, so those are the 3 types of unwholesome mental conduct, and this concludes the 10 types, the 10 pathways or courses of unwholesome karma. Okay, then we come to the types of wholesome karma. We have 3 types of wholesome bodily action. Okay, now this is expressed minimally as refraining from the destruction of life, abstaining from the destruction of life. But the Buddha goes on to elaborate on this, giving it a more positive characterization. He says, with the rod and weapon laid aside, one is not going to harm any other being. One dwells conscientious and merciful, compassionate to all living beings, wishing for the welfare of all living beings. Okay, then the second is abstaining from taking what is not given. Sometimes it's elaborated by living with honestly, not wishing to get by any kind of unjust means the property of others. Then abandoning sexual misconduct. One abstains from sexual relations with any of the types of prohibited persons. Okay, so these are 3 types of wholesome bodily karma. The 4 types of wholesome or righteous verbal karma. One is, first, the minimum is that one abandons false speech, but then the Buddha goes on to explain how, when one is called as a witness, one will speak the truth. Okay, then the next one is abandoning malicious or divisive speech. And then he goes on to characterize it more positively, is that one reunites those who are divided, one promotes friendship between others, and then one enjoys concord, harmony between others. Okay, then the next one, abandoning harsh speech. One speaks words that are gentle, pleasing, lovable, and go to the heart, and that are desired by many. That's the general case, but if you have to criticize somebody, one can do so, providing one speaks in the way that I explained. And then abandoning idle chatter. One speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks words that are worth recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. Okay, so those are the 4 types of wholesome verbal karma. Then the 3 types of wholesome mental karma. Okay, non-covetousness, not desiring to get possession of the belongings of others. Okay, the next is goodwill, not having the wish that others come to harm and suffering, but instead wishing that others will live happily. And then having right view. This is the view that there are real moral distinctions between different types of actions, that good and bad actions produce their fruits or results. Okay, so that is right view. Okay, and then the Buddha goes on to elaborate on the benefits of following these 10 courses of wholesome action. He says, if one who observes righteous conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, should wish, may I be reborn in the company of well-to-do nobles. Here the Buddha refers to the Indian class system. The nobles are the governing class, the administrative class, So one could aspire to be reborn in a well-to-do family of nobles, Brahmins, or regular householders. Then he says, it is possible that on the breakup of the body after death, one will be reborn in accordance with one's wish. That is, when one has a strong accumulation of wholesome karma, then that wholesome karma can support one's wish, one's intention to be reborn in a particular realm. But one has to have enough wholesome karma to support one's wish to be reborn in that realm. If one just does an occasional good deed and many bad deeds, and one aspires to be reborn in a higher realm, it won't work. Okay, then those are the types of fortunate rebirth in the human realm. Then one can aspire to a fortunate rebirth amongst the devas, the different groups of gods. First, the Buddha takes the gods of the sense sphere. These are called the gods of the four great kings, the Tavatimsa devas, the Yama devas, the Tusita devas, the devas who delight in creating, and the devas who wield power over others' creations. I always think that editors, producers, copyright organizations, those who belong to copyright organizations, they get reborn in those realms. Whereas the artists, musicians, get reborn amongst the devas who delight in creating. That's my personal opinion. It's not orthodox. Okay, then comes the next range of higher rebirths, starting with the devas of Brahma's company, going all the way through the Akanita devas. These are the realms of rebirth in what's called the form realm, or the realm of subtle matter. Now, to get reborn in those realms, observing the 10 courses of wholesome karma is a minimum requirement, but it's not sufficient. To go into those realms, one also has to achieve the deep level of samadhi or concentration. Samadhi to the level of what's called jhana, absorption, meditative absorption. Because the mind of the beings in the form realm is a mind which is basically the mind of jhanic meditation. And then, after this, there comes the aspiration to be reborn in the four formless realms. These are the devas of the base of the infinity of space, the devas of the base of the infinity of consciousness, the devas of the base of nothingness, the devas of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, these are four realms of existence posited in the Buddhist cosmology, where there is no physical matter at all. The beings in these realms, it's said, consist entirely of mind and mental factors, without any physical bodies. And the lifespan in these realms is supposed to be inconceivably long, extremely long, like 20,000 cosmic cycles of world evolution and world dissolution, 40,000, 60,000, and then the devas of the base of neither perception or non-perception, the lifespan is to be 84,000 cosmic cycles. Why it's not 80,000, I don't know. Maybe if you do the highest, you get an extra 4,000 cosmic cycles as a kind of bonus. Okay, but none of these realms is regarded as the attainment of liberation. These are all realms within samsara. So one gets reborn there because of one's wholesome karma and one's development of meditative samadhi, concentration, and then one enjoys either the bliss of those realms or the peace of those realms for many years, many aeons, but eventually life there comes to an end and one gets reborn elsewhere, maybe back into the human realm, into a hospital in Manhattan or Brooklyn. Then one has to go through all of the trouble of kindergarten, elementary school, junior high school, competition to get into a good college. Then maybe one has to struggle on the employment market. If one wants to go abroad, one has to apply for a passport. You just can't sit in meditation and think, let me go to Europe, and you wind up in Europe. And so it's not necessarily a solution to the problem of birth and death. It has to come through following the Noble Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. But even that Noble Eightfold Path has its basis, foundation, the 10 ways of wholesome action. So one has to follow that. And so in paragraph 43, the Buddha is saying that one who observes conduct in accordance with the Dhamma of righteous conduct, if that one should wish, by realizing it for myself with direct knowledge, may I, in this very life, enter and dwell in the liberation of mind, the liberation by wisdom that is taintless, through the destruction of the taints of all the defilements. It is possible that this person can fulfill that wish if they observe the 10 courses of wholesome action. Of course, the 10 courses of wholesome action are not sufficient for reaching liberation, but they are part of the necessary requirements for attaining that, part of the requisites. And so it's on the basis of the 10 wholesome actions that one develops the Noble Eightfold Path, and it's through developing the Noble Eightfold Path that one attains this liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. Okay, maybe we'll make this the explanation of the sutta, and then I'll ask if there's any questions based on my explanation.
3 areas. One is simple etymological story about kusala.
Yeah.
Second, in the wrong view aspect, you mentioned the non-belief in the ethic behavior or non-belief in karma. I have become habituated to also include in my understanding of the right view is this notion of no separate self, and I wonder if that plays into it. And third,
I think it's easier for me if I take one question at a time. You remember all your questions.
yeah.
If you ask me, I'll remember the third one, but I might forget the first and second. So let's take each one in turn. I remember that. But it took me a moment. It's like back on it. The etymology of it. Okay, the explanation the commentaries give is not very convincing, but there are 4 meanings of the word wholesome, or 4 ingredients, 4 components in the word wholesome. One is, I think it's 3 components. Okay, what is psychologically healthy? Ethically, what is praiseworthy, blameless or praiseworthy? And karmically, what brings pleasant karmic results, what ripens in happiness. There's a 4th meaning of the word kusala, which the commentaries say is not relevant to this situation. This is the meaning of skillful. Like somebody who is a skillful cook, we would say that he is kusala. We use the word kusala to describe his ability as a cook. Often we see a goldsmith being described in the text, similes of goldsmith. We say a skillful goldsmith, kusala subhanakara. But the commentaries say that meaning of skillful is not relevant to this particular context. Though some translators use the word skillful for kusala in relation to karma. So they have skillful karma and unskillful karma. But to my mind, wholesome is more satisfactory as a translation. The word kusala is also used to refer to one's health. A healthy person is said to be kusala. Okay, the second question, your second question was, I know it is, whether the idea of no separate self is included in right view. Okay, we have to distinguish here, this is an important point, between the right view that is a component of the 10 wholesome karmas, 10 wholesome paths of karma, and right view is a more inclusive category. And first, wrong view does not mean not believing in karma and its fruit, but it's a view which somebody might want to preserve a skeptical reservation regarding the working of karma and its fruit. And that would not be wrong view. Because the person might say, I have no evidence for it. I don't want to place my trust in the word of another. But I'll just leave it as an unanswered question whether there is a life beyond this present one, whether good and bad actions will produce results that correspond to those actions. So as long as one is maintaining this skeptical stance or this non-committal stance, one has not fallen into a wrong view. The wrong view comes when one denies that there are such principles as ethical distinctions and the working of karma bringing its results beyond the present life. Okay, and right view as a course of karma is simply a right view which confirms the reality of moral distinctions, that there are distinctions between good actions and bad actions, wholesome actions and unwholesome actions, and which holds that good and bad actions do produce their results. Suffering for the agent who commits unwholesome actions, bad actions, and well-being and happiness for one who engages in wholesome actions. Now, the understanding of principles like the three characteristics, impermanence, suffering, and non-self, of course this is an aspect of right view, understanding of dependent origination, understanding of Four Noble Truths. But those are the aspects of right view that pertain to the path of liberation. But simply to remain within the sphere of wholesome karma, the right view is simply the right view that affirms the reality of moral distinctions and the effectiveness of actions to produce consequences beyond the present life.
Yes, this is just, I guess, clarifying something. So, if someone was a Christian, or someone was Jew, and they're not following Buddhism,
Yeah.
you know, and my right view would be understanding the noble truth, the noble path, the permanence, independent origination. Then it's not understanding that in the same way, they could still become liberated if they were following a wholesome life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's correct?
Would they be able to become liberated?
Yeah, reach liberation, and we have to rebirth. As following the Christian, I'm a Buddhist, I'm just curious that come old different entities in my life and people who follow different things.
Yeah, I think what we would say is that a signal? Oh, we have to watch, okay. Giving me a warning not to upset him. But I didn't answer your third question. He didn't ask his third question. Let's not take his third question. Then I'll come to your question.
It's more a question about a comment type question. My intention in coming here is to help strengthen and develop my understanding. But in coming here, I use fossil fuel, which, to the best of my knowledge, which now includes Sankara, because I decided to come here, kills people. It's directly involved in killing. So, is this one of those? I think on the one hand, it seems to refer back to a few weeks ago the question of kind of a household and liberation. Because it's in that I don't live here. So I had to come here. And the other is the question is that one of those things that refers to dark and bright, because simultaneously something can't be both dark and bright. So when I drove here, that's the question that I'm playing in my head.
Okay, you have to remember that the definition of karma is volition or intention. Okay, now, first I would say that when one comes here, one doesn't have any intention of killing anybody. And when one uses fossil fuel, even then I would say that when one takes the indirect consequences of it, they're rather remote and long drawn out, to coming to the point where the use of fossil fuel will kill somebody. So one can't be responsible, one can't be generating the karma of killing by using fossil fuel to come here. If there's somebody one doesn't like and wants to get rid of, and then you turn on the motor in his car in his garage so that it generates carbon monoxide, and the carbon monoxide flows out from the garage, say it's the garage attached to the house, into the house, and kills that person, then one is guilty of the karma of killing. But in the case of the use of fossil fuels, I can't say that in driving a car you're guilty of killing anybody. Okay. Okay, now coming back to your question. Okay, different religions set different goals for themselves. And now, we say, Christian religion, Judaism, do not set for themselves the goal of nibbana or liberation. But in Judaism, as I come from a Jewish background, the very concept of an afterlife is somewhat hazy. Maybe it gets clarified only during a rather late period in the history of Judaism. Even in the Old Testament, the very concept of an afterlife is rather hazy. But still, Judaism will generally encourage people to perform wholesome actions. So also actions will be allowed within Judaism, even according to some books of the Bible, required, that Buddhism will say definitely are unwholesome. Animal sacrifices to God, enjoined by God upon King David, or at least in the Leviticus. Somebody knows the Bible better than I do, might correct me on this. But there's a passage where, it's where God reveals all of the details of the laws to Moses, more than the 10 Commandments. These are the laws in detail, which require that when the temple was built in Jerusalem, that regular animal sacrifices be performed there. Large numbers of animals that to be sacrificed. And so one who acts in accordance with those injunctions would certainly not be creating wholesome karma, but unwholesome karma.
The Jew who was living wholesome in a wholesome way, and then obviously...
Yeah, of course one who doesn't, I think nowadays the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, and the practice of animal sacrifice, except in a few very, very Orthodox Jews, is not performed at all. So a Jewish person who completely abstains from killing and observes the principle of non-killing, non-violence, will be creating wholesome karma, which can lead to a favorable rebirth.
I have a different one, another question.
Yeah.
I'm just a little confused about it. When you said that the formless realms, I would think that that is a higher state of calm and rebirth, obviously.
Yeah.
So an entity or a new thing within this formless realm, if they go into the human realm, maybe I can get a better step of karma, and what will create them, or is it a choice, like Bodhisattva comes back to help on this earth, but how would that happen if all of a sudden we get knocked down kind of to the full step of karma?
Okay, when one is reborn in the formless realm, looked at from the mundane point of view, it's considered like, these are considered like the highest, most favorable realms, because the lifespan is so long, and the state of mind there is supposed to be very peaceful, not even disturbed by joy and bliss, but always calm, serene, equanimous. But because life in these realms is impermanent, comes to an end, they're not regarded as exceptionally, from the standpoint of the path to liberation, they're not regarded as especially desirable realms. So one who is practicing meditation can achieve the formless attainments, but if that person aspires to follow the path to liberation, they will not form the resolution to be reborn in the formless realm, because the life in the formless realm doesn't give much opportunity for practicing the path of insight, the path of wisdom, or for creating the other types of wholesome karma.
So this form is more optimistic in liberation.
Yeah, in fact, it said in the Buddhist text that the human realm is especially favorable, even more favorable than divine realms, because human life has a balance between, first, it's not so long that one loses sight of the principle of impermanence, and also it's not so short that one's actions in the human realm are inconsequential to one's further development. And also human life has a mixture of pleasure and pain, happiness and suffering. And so it's this mixture of happiness and suffering that enables one to understand more deeply the true nature of existence, and then to aspire for the path of liberation. Whereas in the divine realms, unless one has very well-developed right understanding, it's easy to get swept away by the pleasures and the bliss of those realms, and to lose sight of the transiency of all sentient existence. Okay.
If a person remains creative and not obviousness, he will not really go into the lower end. Only he is not liberated.
Okay, if a person is greedy, okay, the question is, will a person who is greedy, but doesn't let that greed spill over into covetousness, will that person be able to avoid rebirth in the lower realms? What I don't have complete knowledge of how the process of rebirth works, but what I would think is that if a person's mind is persistently obsessed by greedy thoughts, that they're always thinking with greed, even though they try to restrain that greed from turning into covetousness, that it would still tend to produce a bad rebirth, a rebirth into the lower realms. But the thoughts themselves would not be individually as decisive, as instrumental as thoughts of covetousness would be. Now, there can be people who are very greedy, I would imagine. Let us say a businessman who's never content with his material success that always wants to go on, to expand his economic empire, but never thinks about trying, well, can he expand without thinking about taking over the companies of others, without driving competitors out of business? Maybe not. I have to see a case of somebody who can be greedy without having thoughts of covetousness, who could be greedy all the time. It would be pretty difficult boundary to respect. Okay, any further questions? Okay, now we will end the class, but I have to ask one question. You see, at the same time that I get my class here, Venerable Trewang, on alternate weeks gives a class in the library, but I'm told that people from his class would also like to take my class, but because the classes are scheduled at the same time, they're caught in this conflict. And one suggestion has been made that next time in the spring we have this class on Sunday morning. Is that what you suggest? Well, yeah, this is suggested. If we have the class on Sunday morning, will this be difficult for anybody to attend who would like to attend? 2 people. Sometimes, okay, 3.
Before Sunday, I was hoping to kitchen people.
Hi.
Good. Really, how about Saturday afternoon after 2? Because the other class ends at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
If this class starts after 2, maybe 2:30 or 2, whatever, then they can join both.
If anybody would find Saturday afternoon difficult, put the hand up. Okay, quite a lot. Okay, it seems that they just have to make, unless somebody can suggest some other alternative. Yes. Excuse me? This I don't know because I don't know who's in that class. I mean, I know people in that class, but I don't know what suits their convenience.
They only meet every second Saturday,
Yeah.
and then every second Saturday,
Yeah, but
you can't get it in there.
I had considered this before we had this class in the fall, but then I realized that because of Thanksgiving and then Thanksgiving vacation, Christmas vacation, we'd have too few classes. We're having the class next week, yeah. Anyway, you could give some thought to other ways we could schedule it, and I'll speak to Venerable Trewang about scheduling his class. Okay, so next week what I will do is to take the class, the topic of the bases of merit and the readings on the 3 types of merit, 3 bases of merit. This will be going from 166 to the end of this chapter. And the 2 classes I had originally scheduled on deepening one's perspective on the world, those we'll have to take in the spring semester after the winter break here, starting in, I think it's early April.
So that's next week, and then...
Yeah. Because the monastery pretty much closes off for the 3 winter months. Okay, so now we end with the sharing of the merit. We share the merit with the Devas, with the Dhamma protecting deities, the Nagas or dragon spirits, the Bhutas or the fear spirits, asking them to rejoice in these merits and to protect the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and